You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 19th of July 2013. Believe it? Child sex grooming arrests in Bradford fall slightly. UK taxi rapes, no woman is safe in a cab. Scotland, Pakistani taxi driver and rapist battles to remain in Britain. Rogue businesses to be targeted for illegal workers. Growing racism spurs rise in extremist parties, Commission says. German finance minister visits Greece as austerity measures usher in job cuts. Nick Griffin MEP from the Welsh marches. Dubai imprisons Norwegian woman who reported rape. Detroit becomes biggest US city to file for bankruptcy. Thought for the day, no you can't have honey mummy. And finally, a gaggle of PC plods. UK news. Believe it? Child sex grooming arrests in Bradford falls slightly. Believe it? Well, yes I do, it's a numbers fiddle. The Bradford Telegraph and Argus blasted that headline recently above a most confusing article that claimed year-on arrests for child sex grooming fell slightly in Bradford according to statistics from a Freedom of Information request. Two West Yorkshire police divisions in Bradford saw their arrests rise from 152 to 166 for the period March 2012 to March 2013, and those charged fell from 46 to 25, whilst across West Yorkshire the number of arrests fell from 684 to 639. The article features comments from Assistant Chief Constable Ingrid Lee, Member of Parliament Chris Hopkins, Councillor Ralph Berry and a spokesman for the Bradford Council of Mosques. All expressed their horror and aversion to the scale of child sexual exploitation, and several commented the issue goes beyond the Asian community. The most laughable comment was from the spokesman for the Bradford Council of Mosques, who said, "The drop in overall numbers seems to suggest that the message is getting through." Coming a close second was the Assistant Chief Constable's comment about the commitment of the police in pursuing this crime. The report never mentioned the number of crimes actually reported to the police, and quick research could not find the answer. All in all, this writer believes the only thing this story is saying is that the police are not doing their jobs. UK taxi rapes. No woman is safe in a cab. Sarah Kern is a senior fellow at the New York-based Gatestone Institute, writes of the UK. Taxi rapes are rarely reported, apparently because the politically incorrect crimes are not deemed to be newsworthy. Several years ago, BBC radio host Sam Mason, a single mother, was fired after she called a taxi company and requested a non-Asian driver to take her 14-year-old daughter to her grandparents' home, preferably a female driver. The operator refused and said, "We would class that as being racist." Mason responded, "It's not your 14-year-old daughter." A BBC spokesman said, "Mason's comments were completely unacceptable. She will no longer be working for the BBC." Great Britain is in the throes of a rape and paedophilia epidemic unlike anything the country has experienced in living memory. Many of the sex crimes are being perpetrated by Muslim child grooming gangs responsible for drugging, raping and torturing hundreds and possibly thousands of British girls. But another wave of sex crimes involves predatory Muslim taxi drivers who are raping female passengers. The number of so-called taxi rapes is snowballing to such an extent that a British judge has issued a warning that no woman can expect to be safe whilst travelling in a cab. Reliable statistics on taxi rapes nationwide are difficult to obtain, and Freedom of Information requests seeking accurate data on cab-related sexual assaults are routinely denied. However, a much acclaimed report produced by the London Metropolitan Police Service estimates that on average there are a total of 1,125 sexual assaults, including rapes, each year involving taxi drivers in just London. This works out to approximately 22 sexual assaults against women by taxi drivers each week in England's capital city alone. Moreover, according to a report entitled Ending Violence Against Women and Girls in the UK, published by the Home Office in March 2013, Only around 1 in 10 women who experience serious sexual assault report it to the police. As a result, one can infer that the actual number of taxi rapes across Britain as a whole is far greater than many are willing to admit. Apart from a few high-profile cases, taxi rapes are rarely reported by national newspapers in Britain, apparently because the politically incorrect crimes are not deemed to be newsworthy. But a survey of stories buried deep inside local newspapers shows that taxi rapes are occurring in all parts of England, Wales and Scotland on an almost daily basis. Surren goes on to highlight around 30 cases from the local papers that most of the public would never see. World at 8 states, stop importing Muslim rapists and see how the figures fare then. Scotland, Pakistani taxi driver and rapist battles to remain in Britain. Taxi driver Shavkat Ranja arrived in Britain in 1985, convicted in 1999 for rape in what the judge described as a prolonged, degrading and indecent attack. He was sentenced to 9 years for his depraved attack on his young female passenger. He served 6 years and was released in 2006. For the last 7 years he's been using legal aid to fight his battle to remain in Britain. World at 8 says, knife for castrating and deportation order for him and all his family will suffice, I believe. Rogue businesses to be targeted for illegal workers. Rogue businesses are to face fines of up to £20,000 per worker if caught with an illegal worker on their premises. The government also plans to bring in measures to allow recovery of fines from directors and partners of limited liability firms if the businesses fail to pay. The new law to be brought in has made immigration officers happy with the 100% rise in fines. Last week a business in Blackpool was hard hit when immigration law enforcement officers nabbed 5 illegal workers, costing the business a possible £100,000. Cumbria saw the largest illegal worker arrest this week at a business in South Cumbria. One World at 8 reporter commented, "If you come into contact with a suspicious non-British character working on a petrol station or a restaurant, call the immigration services immediately. Some problems we, the general public, can help avoid." European news. Growing racism spurs rise in extremist parties, Commission says. Speaking to reporters in Lithuania's capital Vilnius, EU Home Affairs Commissioner Cecilia Malmström said the EU has never before seen so many far-right parties in elected bodies since the Second World War. In many countries, xenophobia, populism and racism is on the rise, she said, noting such political parties will most likely be sending emissaries to the EU's Brussels-based parliament next year. Some of these parties have existed for a long time in the European Union, some are quite new, some are very close to entering into government, she said. So, creeping racism and xenophobia in Europe may contribute to an upsurge of nationalistic, far-right MEPs following European Parliament elections next May. World at 8 says wrong. It is the increasing kowtowing of existing governments to their immigrant populations that will see a greater number of nationalists elected next spring. German Finance Minister visits Greece as austerity measures usher in job cuts. German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble visited Athens on Thursday, hours after the Greek Parliament voted through a bill paving the way for thousands of public sector jobs to be cut. The measures that were voted through early Thursday had to be approved in order for Greece to receive the latest €6.8 billion slice of international bailout funds needed to keep the country afloat. The bill scraped through with just 153 lawmakers out of the 293 present in the 300-seat parliament voting in favour. Under the new legislation, 4,000 civil servants, including teachers, could be out of work this year. Another 25,000 will be on mobility scheme by the end of the year, allowing them 8 months to seek employment in different departments while on the 75% of their salary. A total of 15,000 are expected to be out of work by the end of 2014 to comply with the requirements of Greece's lenders, the International Monetary Fund, European Union and European Central Bank, which are asking for a slimming down of Greece's inflated public sector. I hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP from the Welsh Marches for his report today, in which he covers Libya and Syria and finishes off with a warning to the elderly, which of course I personally will ignore as I ain't elderly yet.
Well, I'm recording this broadcast from the garden. We've broken up for at the end of term now at the European Parliament, so there's nothing from the belly of the beast for a few weeks. We're back at the end of August, but I'll cover other things instead. The last thing in the European Parliament this week, I was there with Clive Jefferson. We did all sorts of things, sorted out various bureaucratic loose ends, but also recorded 4 short pieces for BNP TV. They'll be going out over the next couple of weeks. It's another one of the BNP's growing multimedia operations, which I hope you listen to and watch. All these things are done overwhelmingly by volunteers, and they really are good. So I'll leave you to get on with that. As I say, I'll bring you news from the European Parliament when we go back at the end of August. Frankly, it's good to be away from there. Coming back this time took 3.5 hours to do 2 or 3 miles on the M25 on the way home. My heart goes out to those of you who live in southern England, when basically it's always like that. It's a nightmare, isn't it? This country is so overcrowded that it's utter madness out there. But there you go. So we've got a busy summer ahead with the various British National Party activities and similar events. Watch out for those. The 10th and 11th of August, we've got 2 very, very important seminars on postal vote acquisition and voter registration for key activists. We held one of those the other week. It went very well, as I think we told you before, but this really is an important thing. So if you can get to one of those, please do. You also might like to know that on the bank holiday weekend at the tail end of August, we've got last minute opportunities come up. I say last minute, it's 6 weeks away, isn't it, still? But an opportunity has come up to hold an event on a lovely site in the Welsh Marches. We're not looking to have huge numbers of people there. I think more than 100, and we'd be absolutely whacked out anyway. But really, we want that for activists with young families, for people who are really genuinely interested in doing a bit of mucking around with British folk songs, things with good choruses and so on, with, I'm sure, a few beers. People who love the outdoors and beautiful scenery and just want to be with nationalist comrades. And from a political point of view, the people who are really interested in using social networking online to help to promote our cause and our message. We'll be discussing those things there. I certainly hope to see a lot of our BNP online activists at that. We'll be inviting all of you specifically, but to those of you who haven't perhaps looked at the online activism operation that we're doing, I knew of course what was going on with it weeks and weeks ago or months ago when we decided to do this, but I only signed up the other day and I can tell you it's brilliant. I'm blown away with how good that system is. It's really something quite special. So if you're not already registered as an online activist, do have a look. It's free. You can earn prizes. You've got fun. You can tease your neighbours about beating them. I'm ahead of Clive Jefferson now, which of course he's sore as hell about. But we can't claim the prizes. Other people can. But I do urge you, have a look at, just go on our main BNP website, look at the top banner, and as it rotates, every 4th one comes up. It's online activism, register here. And if I could register that, so can you, because it really is easy. And it's good fun. So, that's going to be our summer. I wonder what Edward Snowden's going to be doing over the summer. Presumably still holed up in Moscow airport, I guess. Now, as nationalists, as British nationalists, we've rather tended to ignore that. I think people have looked at Snowden and thought in terms of him in some way being connected with WikiLeaks, who of course leaked all our membership lists. In fact, of course, he's not at all. He's simply a whistleblower for from the National Security Agency in the USA. I think a lot of our people have thought, well, has it got much to do with us? Well, yes, it has, actually, in as far as what Snowden's revelations revealed is, I think, what we already knew, that between the Americans and our own government, between the NSA and GCHQ, there is an enormous, all-encompassing catch-all spying operation on everything electronic that goes on in this world, particularly in the Western world. Whatever you see, whatever you do, whatever you say, they've got it all. God knows how they manage to process all that data, but the mere fact that they can do it, that they're not spying on terrorists or terrorist suspects, they're spying on everybody. In fact, it's well known in intelligence circles that people like Al-Qaeda terrorists, they encrypt everything. They're not picking that up. They're not getting into that. It's ordinary people they're spying on. It's us that they're spying on. And the way in which the British government has, or successive British governments, have actively conspired to use facilities in this country and to allow facilities in this country to be used to allow the United States to spy on all of us, all our firms, to steal all sorts of secrets, including economic ones. It's an absolute disgrace. And really action is needed to restore British sovereignty, not just think about things such as the European Union, not just control of our borders, but also control of our own information, and establishing that the only people who should be spied on in this country are people who are real suspects for something genuinely bad, and the only people who should be allowed to do it are the security services of this country under the control of a government of this country appointed by and removable by the people of this country. You have to have security agencies and so on, but they have to be under national control, otherwise you have international tyranny, which is what we've got now. So that's been an interesting thing watching that, and as I say, do look at it from that point of view rather than thinking, well, Snowden, he's probably some kind of leftist, I'm not really fussed. It's you they're spying on, it's us they're spying on, and it needs getting under control. Why is our government, this government and the previous one and the one before that, why have they been so keen to allow our facilities to be used to spy on all of us? I think it's pretty simple really when you think about it, isn't it? That they know they're doing wrong. They don't trust us. They want us under control. They want to know who's thinking what, who might do something in response to all the wicked things that they do. There, I'm drawn again looking at the papers this morning. There's Philip Hammond, the Defence Secretary, saying that, oh, well, they're going to have to send the SAS to Syria, quite possibly, because otherwise chemical weapons might fall into the hands of the rebels. Couple of points here. First of all, these chemical weapons, they're weapons of mass destruction, and they're almost certainly not there. But secondly, the only way in which they could fall into the hands of the rebels, who are losing that war now, thank God, is if the British government, the American government, the French government were to follow through their plans and arm the rebels, then yes, if they overthrow President Assad's regime, then without a shadow of a doubt, whatever weapons Syria has would fall into their hands. But for this government to use the threat of things falling into the hands of the same rebel terrorist Islamist fanatics that they're supporting, to use that as an excuse to say they've got to send British troops and British taxpayers paid for bombs and so on to interfere in the affairs of Syria, it really is, which is their most pathetic excuse so far. That's really all I can say on that one, other than to point out what kind of a man Philip Hammond is. He's the man who said that he's going to carry on taking more than £2,000 every single month in mortgage interest payments until the rules are changed for his second home. Because you see, he has to have a second home in London because his constituency home in Surrey is about 35 minutes away commuting by train. What a crook. What a crook. Everyone knows why you buy property in London, if you possibly can. It's because there's so much foreign money pouring into the place that expensive houses and flats go up in price. It's an investment for Mr. Hammond, paid for by the poor bloody British taxpayer. And this is the man who, as Defence Secretary, is claiming the moral right to send our sons and our daughters and to use our taxes to interfere in other people's countries. Words fail me what kind of a creature that is. Similarly, we've got Cameron and Haig saying that, quietly of course, they're going to have the army in Libya, probably by the autumn, because otherwise the Islamist terrorists are going to take over completely and they're going to become a threat to us. Who put those people in power in Libya in the first place? You got it, Cameron and Haig, with our money and our RAF. These people deserve to be on trial. One final thing. Personal matter now, forget the real politics. We're in the middle of a heat wave, as I'm sure you know. It's baking here in the Welsh Marches, although there's a lovely breeze just now, which you may be able to hear. But it's lovely for people who are young and fit, such as myself, probably such as you. But honestly, heat heat on this scale and this intensity and going on now by British standards for so long, it's actually very, very dangerous to the elderly. There's old folk dying out there because they don't drink enough. They think, oh, if I had a drink now, I'll have to get up and wee, and so on. So they sit there and they die in the heat. So if you've got elderly neighbours, please, just as a lot of our people did in the winter during the snow and the cold, please pop round and see them and check they've had enough cups of tea, check they've got water, check that they're clearly not dehydrated. Just go in, pop round, only takes a moment, but they're our old folk, they're part of our country. There's nothing left in this country's social services networks in many places to look out for neighbours. It's up to us. Actually, it's the proper thing to do in a decent, healthy society. We want to make a decent, healthy society. We're going to make, one day, a decent, healthy society again. But in the meantime, let's do our own bit in our own patch. Get out there, chuck it in neighbours. Speak to you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much, Nick. World news. Dubai imprisons Norwegian woman who reported rape. Norwegian businesswoman Marta Deborah Dalev, 24, was convicted Wednesday of having sex outside of marriage after she reported rape. She was also found guilty of perjury and of drinking alcohol. Dalev told police March the 6th that she was raped while in the Emirate on business. Her father said she was instead jailed for 4 days and had her passport and money confiscated. She was then charged. For a rape conviction, United Arab Emirates law requires either a confession or 4 adult male witnesses to the attack. In December, a 28-year-old British woman who reported being kidnapped and gang raped by 3 men in Dubai was found guilty of drinking alcohol without a licence. She was fined $257. 3 years ago, an Abu Dhabi court sentenced an 18-year-old Emirati woman to a year in prison for illicit sex after she reported that 6 men had gang raped her. In 2008, an Australian woman managing a United Arab Emirates resort reported being brutally gang raped whilst unconscious because she'd been drugged. She was convicted of illegal sex outside marriage and sentenced to 11 months in prison, in addition to 1 month for drinking alcohol. World Day states, it would seem highly unlikely that these Muslim rapists would have 4 uninvolved witnesses to give evidence for the prosecution, and that a woman would not have to be very drunk to even let them get near her. Detroit becomes biggest US city to file for bankruptcy. Detroit, once the heart of the US motor industry and birthplace of Motown, has become the largest city in US history to file for bankruptcy. Kevin Orr, an emergency city manager hired by the state in March to stop the city's fiscal free fall, said it would be business as usual for Detroit citizens. Already a picture of urban decline, Detroit has become the largest US city to file for bankruptcy to try to resolve debts that have reached $18.5 billion. That's 14 billion euros. The budget deficit, unemployment and the murder rate are all soaring. Public services have all but collapsed and the population has more than halved since 1950. If it is approved by a judge, the bankruptcy would force creditors into negotiations and could enable the city to liquidate assets. Once Detroit symbolised the strength of the American car industry. General Motors, whose headquarters is still there, said in a statement this was a day that we and others hoped would not come. We believe, however, that today also can mark a clean start for the city. Now, the governor of Michigan State, Republican Rick Snyder, says Detroit simply can't raise enough revenue to meet its obligations. But unions have accused the governor of using bankruptcy to try to seize power. This is not about fixing the city's finances. It's about the governor and his own agenda to take over the city of Detroit, said Ed McNeil, chief negotiator for a coalition of 33 unions that represent most of the city's service workers. Thought for the day. No, you can't have honey mummy. There are several aspects to the bee problem worldwide and in the UK. Bees contribute £500 million to the British economy as they pollinate 75% of our crops. Albert Einstein said that virtually when the bees go, we humans have 4 years left. Although he might have been exaggerating a mite, these words are probably true. Bees have survived millions of years, global warmings, ice ages, meteors, the lot. But with modern man, they ain't doing so well. First, give the bees a break. While you may spread a heaping tablespoonful of honey on your morning toast without thinking, creating each drop is no small feat. To make 1 pound of honey, a colony must visit over 2 million flowers, flying over 55,000 miles at up to 15 miles per hour to do so. During a bee's lifetime she will only make approximately 1 teaspoon of honey, which is essential to the hive for times when nectar is scarce, such as during winter. At times there may be an excess of honey in the hive, but this amount is difficult to determine, and large-scale beekeepers often remove all or most of the honey and replace it with a sugar or corn syrup substitute. It's no wonder bees are disappearing. Can you imagine someone removing all of the fruit juice from your house and replacing it with fruit-flavoured soda? It may still give you energy, but eventually it'll probably make you sick. Another thing to think about while you sit by your beeswax candle and contemplate the lives of these little fellows is that bees must consume approximately 8 pounds of honey to produce each pound of wax. And the more we take from them, bee pollen, royal jelly, propolis, the harder these creatures must work and the more bees are needed, which isn't good news for a population that is dwindling. When you see a jar of honey, you may think of the sweet cartoon hives depicted in childhood stories such as Winnie the Pooh. But most hives are now confined to large boxes, a completely foreign shape to bees, that are jostled and shipped around the country to pollinate crops and produce honey. This is stressful and confusing to the bees' natural navigation systems. Along the way, bees are lost and killed and may spread diseases from one infected hive to another. The practice of bee farming often limits the bees' diet to monoculture crops, hint hint, blueberry, clover, lavender, honey, introduces large amounts of pesticides into their systems and causes the farm bees to crowd out the native wild pollinators that may have been otherwise present. Beekeepers, even small-scale backyard beekeepers, will also kill the queens if they feel the hive is in danger of swarming, fleeing their file cabinet-shaped homes or drones that they deem unnecessary to honey production. Honey is meant as a health food for bees. The more we interfere with their natural processes, both by relying on farmed honeybees as pollinators rather than other native wild bees, insects or animals, and to feed our desires for sweets, the closer we're coming to agricultural disaster. Now, when I was a child, just after the war had ended, we were still on rationing. I never saw honey for years. In fact, we had no sweets, no sugary cereals, no mass-produced sugary, glucosey, fructosey or honeyfied stuffs at all, and frankly our teeth until rationing stopped on July the 4th, 1954 were marvellous, and few if any children were fat, diabetic or had behavioural problems. In fact, on my morning porridge I had a real treat, and that was Tate and Lyle golden syrup. Bloody lovely. Knocks the spots off honey, and I'm a honey lover, which is something we will all have to come to terms with in the future if we want our honeybees to survive. Abraham Lyle was a religious man and used the image of the lion's body being used as a hive on his tins. Out of the strong came forth sweetness. This is a reference to the biblical story in chapter 14 of the book of Judges, in which Samson was travelling to the land of the Philistines in search of a wife. During the journey he killed a lion, and when he passed the same spot on his return, he noticed that a swarm of bees had formed a comb of honey in the carcass. Samson later turned this into a riddle at a wedding. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. While it's not known exactly why this image and slogan were chosen, Abraham Lyle was a deeply religious man, and it's been suggested that they refer either to the strength of the Lyle Company or the tins in which the golden syrup is sold. In 1904 they were registered together as a trademark, and in 2006 Guinness World Records declared the mark to be Britain's oldest brand. Lyle's golden syrup was awarded a royal warrant in 1911. In 1921 Lyle's business merged with Tate, a sugar refining firm founded by Sir Henry Tate in 1859, to become Tate and Lyle. And in 2010 Tate and Lyle sold its sugar refining and golden syrup business to American Sugar Refining. I'm encouraging people to use replacements for honey, as honey should really not be mass marketed, because although the reasons given in the programme last night on ITV Tonight were carefully chosen not to offend, that is what they were, carefully chosen. Apparently the main reasons why our bee population in the UK stands at around half of what they were 30 years ago are the British climate, loss of their habitat, use of pesticides and hastily skated over an imported parasite. This parasite, Varroa destructus, is a parasitical mite and originates, as many nasties do, in Southeast Asia. What exact region of Southeast Asia Wikipedia is not clear, but reads thus. Varroa mites were first discovered in Southeast Asia in about 1904, but are now present on all continents except Australia. They were discovered in the United States in 1987, in New Zealand in 2000 and in Devon, United Kingdom in 1992. So obviously fairly recent to the UK, along with a huge increase in immigrants from those areas, which is, as usual, studiously ignored by the media. These mites are generally not a problem for a strongly growing hive. When the hive population growth is reduced in preparation for winter or due to poor late summer forage, the mite population growth can overtake that of the bees and can then destroy the hive. Often a colony will simply abscond, leave as a swarm but leaving no population behind under such conditions. As the majority of our UK hives are being undermined anyway, this aggressive parasite is wreaking havoc. How it came to this country is down to obvious facts. We either imported it in foreign hives, plants, foodstuffs or people from Southeast Asia. It ain't rocket science, is it? The sad fact about the world is that a large proportion of it is people by people who have just evolved in a sense and cannot or will not feed themselves or look after their land or nature. The rest of the world is dedicated to destroying nature by either wearing it, eating it or simply building more crap on it or digging up more vital minerals. Both are just as inherently stupid as the other, but at least the former doesn't have the benefit of education to fall back on. So parasites were shovelled to the bottom of the pile, as are most things connected to immigration. Remember DEFRA? Those are the killing of thousands of healthy cattle due to bushmeat being imported into this country for our monkey eaters. Our cattle farmers have never truly recovered from that, and even now this country is importing more meat than ever when it should be encouraging and paying our farmers to breed and raise their own. This brings me to the pesticide debate. Apparently we use 80 tonnes of pesticides in the UK every year alone, and the main protagonist is neonicotinoids, which are lethal to arthropods. When they go to pollinate crops grown with this poison, they become woozy, forgetful, they lose their hive finding capabilities, and they do not reproduce. Sound familiar? I think they're putting this in our food. The rapeseed oil crops grown with this have a very high yield, and most hard-up farmers are unwilling to give it up. A field dressed with neonicotinoids seed can give from a handful of seeds up to 2 tonnes dressed seed, which results in nearly a tonne of oil. Faced with results like this, and a government or government body who need results and don't pay farmers if they don't get them, the EU ban on neonicotinoids doesn't apply here, as our government voted against the European ban in the EU earlier this year. It takes just 4 nanograms to kill one honeybee, and a small file shown could wipe out all the bees in Sussex alone. And we are still using it. It stands to reason if we use honey and honey wax for candles, cosmetics, food and drink additives in the huge food industry, and use honey in its fairly natural state as a spread, and our population has increased since 1951 when it was 46 million to 65 million by 2011, and these are the so-called official figures. What governments don't realise is that all these new people need food, and in reality what the government, be it this or any other government, is desperately avoiding is the fact that higher food prices, be they due to the decline of our bees or simply bad organisation, would lead to riots and social disorder. Why? Because this island is trying to accommodate just too many people, and at a time when our natural reserves are being sucked dry or destroyed. Some of it is greed, but most of it is the sheer number of people who think that the UK is an unlimited source of cheap food, which results in the inevitable decline of natural food stocks which follows the increase in the UK population. The poor bees need a chance, as indeed we Brits do, to recover. Our government is not afraid for us, but afraid for the social order if they don't keep the lid on what is a multicultural hellhole. DEFRA are resisting the ban on pesticides as their own tests were contaminated by neonicotinoids, but surely the drastic result in the decline of honeybees is obvious enough. Our bees have put up with the British weather for thousands of years, and 1 year of a late spring does not a blight make. Foreign parasites do, and bad pesticides do, and just too much wanting and usage of what is a natural and spare reserve of sweetness are the real killers here. And all of it is down to human greed, stupidity and ignorance. Take all those people who live in their little houses, paving over huge entire areas of their gardens because they're basically lazy. All this decking and paving simply feeds the floodplains and kills arthropods, which will one day hopefully survive us. Have a formal garden, but try to either plant the right flowers like lavender, which lasts all year, and catnip and more, instead of lumps of wood and concrete. We Brits have always done gardens, but of course now our culture is changing, and the people living in quite a few of our regions now do not do gardens at all, let alone try to reverse the trend for the poor bee. As long as they can still eat honey nut crunch for breakfast, they're all right. The sooner we can ban pesticides and rely on a smaller yield, the better. This island and its farmers are simply too small to become a source of food for huge amounts of foreigners who are still flooding in unstopped, unchecked, and probably carrying yet more unknown diseases for our island and both its natural inhabitants and us humans. Don't buy honey. Buy some other source of sweetener. Don't choose honey products, many of which are obtained from foreign sources and China, and we know what their animal husbandry is like. Apart from that, foreign imports could be a source of the Varroa destructus or yet another unknown parasite. Prince Charles is promoting meadow sites to help the bees, but we have to remember that 97% of our meadows since 1940 have been built on for either homes, schools or hospitals for future immigrant populations, as we are always being told the Brit population is either dying or non-existent. So not only are our natural resources being decimated in an effort to feed these people, but the bees' natural habitat is being taken away as well. And don't think for a minute that any foreigner actually thinks of how, where from, or what by he gets his food. It's just more than he would get in his home country. I feel nature is giving us a message that so far is being ignored. Enough is enough, and we must all do our bit to save one of the most precious gifts nature has given the world. Nationalism is loving your country and what is indigenous to that country, not necessarily what arrives on our shores unwanted and unneeded. It doesn't hurt once in a while to be a tree hugger or realise that humans are parasites themselves, and we don't have to encourage any more to these shores. Think bees. And finally, a gaggle of PC plods. Police forces in rural corners of Xinjiang province have been sending geese officers out on patrol since earlier this year, according to a report on the Chinese language website of the state-run People's Daily newspaper. Among all poultry, geese are known for being extremely vigilant and having excellent hearing. Zhang Huangshen, a police chief in Xinjiang Shaoan country, told the newspaper. The People's Daily said that sharp, keen and brave animals were proving an invaluable tool in Xinjiang's war on crime and were now being actively promoted across the region. Law enforcement agents described the geese as a new highlight of stability maintenance work and said they had proved themselves better than dogs in tackling crime. Geese are very brave. They spread their wings and will attack any strangers entering someone's home, said Mr. Zhang, the local police chief. Authorities in Shaoan County say their goose-stepping recruits have at least brought a measure of security to the troubled region. I don't know, I'm reading this and laughing so much. In June, one gaggle of police geese reportedly managed to snare a man who'd broken into the local police headquarters to take a motorbike. After drugging 2 police dogs and climbing over the wall, the man was about to make his getaway when he came face to face with some 20 feathered gatekeepers. The geese fanned their wings and began shrieking when they saw the stranger. The duty officer woke up and the thief was caught red-handed. Xinjiang is one of China's most volatile regions. In recent years, the province has suffered repeated outbreaks of inter-ethnic violence between the Han Chinese and Uyghurs, a mostly Muslim Turkic-speaking group who make up nearly half of the province's 22 million population. Tensions between the two groups have been running high since 2009, when nearly 200 lives were lost during rioting in Xinjiang's capital, Urumqi. This presenter says, the geese PC sound lovely, but when dealing with Turkic Muslims, dogs are best, and the fiercer the better. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy, cool and safe weekend. Don't go jumping into unknown waters and keep out of the sun, Melanoma is not a good look, and remember our natural barrier against the sun, our ozone layer, is depleted. Good night. Suggest that the message is getting through. Coming a close second was the Assistant Chief Constable's comment about the commitment of the police in pursuing this crime. The report never mentioned the number of crimes actually reported to the police, and quick research could not find the answer. All in all, this writer believes the only thing this story is saying is that the police are not doing their jobs. UK taxi rapes. No woman is safe in a cab. Sarah Kern is a senior fellow at the New York-based Gatestone Institute, writes of the UK. Taxi rapes are rarely reported, apparently because the politically incorrect crimes are not deemed to be newsworthy. Several years ago, BBC radio host Sam Mason, a single mother, was fired after she called a taxi company and requested a non-Asian driver to take her 14-year-old daughter to her grandparents' home, preferably a female driver. The operator refused and said, "We would class that as being racist." Mason responded, "It's not your 14-year-old daughter." A BBC spokesman said, "Mason's comments were completely unacceptable. She will no longer be working for the BBC." Great Britain is in the throes of a rape and paedophilia.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 19th of July 2013. Believe it? Child sex grooming arrests in Bradford fall slightly. UK taxi rapes, no woman is safe in a cab. Scotland, Pakistani taxi driver and rapist battles to remain in Britain. Rogue businesses to be targeted for illegal workers. Growing racism spurs rise in extremist parties, Commission says. German finance minister visits Greece as austerity measures usher in job cuts. Nick Griffin MEP from the Welsh marches. Dubai imprisons Norwegian woman who reported rape. Detroit becomes biggest US city to file for bankruptcy. Thought for the day, no, you can't have honey mummy. And finally, a gaggle of PC epidemic, unlike anything the country has experienced in living memory. Many of the sex crimes are being perpetrated by Muslim child grooming gangs responsible for drugging, raping and torturing hundreds and possibly thousands of British girls. But another wave of sex crimes involves predatory Muslim taxi drivers who are raping female passengers. The number of so-called taxi rapes is snowballing to such an extent that a British judge has issued a warning that no woman can expect to be safe whilst travelling in a cab. Reliable statistics on taxi rapes nationwide are difficult to obtain, and freedom of information requests seeking accurate data on cab-related sexual assaults are routinely denied. However, a much acclaimed report produced by the London Metropolitan Police Service estimates that on average there are a total of 1,125 sexual assaults, including rapes, each year involving taxi drivers in just London. This works out to approximately 22 sexual assaults against women by taxi drivers each week in England's capital city alone. Moreover, according to a report entitled Ending Violence Against Women and Girls in the UK, published by the Home Office in March 2013, only around 1 in 10 women who experience serious sexual assaults. UK news. Believe it? Child sex grooming arrests in Bradford fall slightly. Believe it? Well, yes I do, it's a numbers fiddle. The Bradford Telegraph and Argus blasted that headline recently above a most confusing article that claimed year-on arrests for child sex grooming fell slightly in Bradford according to statistics from a Freedom of Information request. 2 West Yorkshire police divisions in Bradford saw their arrests rise from 152 to 166 for the period March 2012 to March 2013, and those charged fell from 46 to 25, whilst across West Yorkshire the number of arrests fell from 684 to 639. The article features comments from Assistant Chief Constable Ingrid Lee, Member of Parliament Chris Hopkins, Councillor Ralph Berry and a spokesman for the Bradford Council of Mosques. All expressed their horror and aversion to the scale of child sexual exploitation, and several commented the issue goes beyond the Asian community. The most laughable comment was from the spokesman for the Bradford Council of Mosques, who said, "The drop in overall numbers seems to assault, report it to the police." As a result, one can infer that the actual number of taxi rapes across Britain as a whole is far greater than many are willing to admit. Apart from a few high-profile cases, taxi rapes are rarely reported by national newspapers in Britain, apparently because the politically incorrect crimes are not deemed to be newsworthy. But a survey of stories buried deep inside local newspapers shows that taxi rapes are occurring in all parts of England, Wales and Scotland on an almost daily basis. Søren goes on to highlight around 30 cases from the local papers that most of the public would never see. World at 8 states, stop importing Muslim rapists and see how the figures fare then. Scotland, Pakistani taxi driver and rapist battles to remain in Britain. Taxi driver Shavkat Ranja arrived in Britain in 1985, convicted in 1999 for rape in what the judge described as a prolonged, degrading and indecent attack. He was sentenced to 9 years for his depraved attack on his young female passenger. He served 6 years and was released in 2006. For the last 7 years he's been using legal aid to fight his battle to remain in Britain. World at 8 says, knife for castrating and